Good afternoon. Aloha Kako. On behalf of Dean Jarvis Hedges, I welcome you to the John A. Burns School of Medicine. This is the auditorium that we have, and the class usually meets here for colloquia on Fridays. Can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, good. All right. This is an interesting week because this week we'll celebrate the 50th anniversary of JAPSTOM. And this, I think, is a wonderful way to open the week. And we're very, very privileged today to have Dr. David Sifu be our speaker. And I think you'll enjoy him very, very much. Just a little bit of Dr. Sifu. I looked at his 43-page curriculum vitae, and I was supposed to introduce him and they gave me 3 minutes. It's very difficult to digest 43 pages in 3 minutes, but I tried to do my best. Dr. Sifu is a tenured professor at the Virginia Commonwealth University in Virginia. He is also chief of physical medicine and rehabilitation services at the university. He's the founding director of the Center for Rehabilitation Sciences and Engineering at Virginia Commonwealth University. He's the national director of PM&R, Physical Medicine Rehabilitation Office, and a cabinet-appointed member of the senior executive staff of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. And this is very significant to all veterans. And so we are really indeed honored to have him here. He has been funded on 37 research grants for which amount to over $128 million. That's very significant. Currently, he's the principal investigator for the VA Department of Defense 62 million chronic effects of neurotrauma. That's very envious. I wish the University of Hawaii had part of that money. He has been an academic physiatrist for over 20 years. I met Dr. Sifu really 2.5, 3 years ago. And it was such a pleasure and awesome because I've known that name for many, many, many years. And it was an interesting and awe-inspiring experience to meet him personally. He's delivered more than 490 regional, national, and international lectures. He's published more than 200 articles and 65 abstracts, and co-authored 20 book chapters and books. He's also past president of the American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. It's with great honor to introduce Dr. David Sifu.
Before you get started.
Yeah, God, give me another lay.
Yes.
Yeah.
All the traditions, so
Fantastic.
thank you.
Thank you. Oh, two of them.
From
Thank
some
you.
of the graduate students.
Thank you so
too.
much. Thank you.
Happy
Thank you.
birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Let me just get this on because this is for the recording, right? Okay. I have all these great CV things, but this isn't one of them. Testing, 1, 2. Is that cool? Okay. Obviously, I'm humbled by your introduction, and I appreciate it. You'll find out by the end of this talk that I'm none of those things. They're all true, but I'm definitely a little more down to earth and chill, and I'll probably say some funny but inappropriate things. So you'll see I'm actually just a normal, regular person. And that's kind of the approach that we're going to take in this talk. I don't mean to talk down to any of you. I don't know really that much more than you all do, but I really like to talk it at a very basic level. Because you'll see that there's a lot of misinformation in the field of rehabilitation, but particularly in the field of concussion with all the excitement. And I want to brag just a little, and this will be, I'll probably do it about 5 times, but this is one of them, but I won't really, is if you really want to see my great work, this week's issue of ESPN, the magazine, which is all about the body or bodies, it has really like sexy athlete, like half-naked pictures. I'm not in that yet. But there's an article that talks about Joe Namath and his interest in getting hyperbaric oxygen therapy for people with concussions from sports. And so, Joe Namath is a quarterback from the Jets and stuff. I was on the other side of the discussion, so I'm in the article, and I kind of am saying kind of negative things. I feel bad because I love Joe Namath. But also this week, all week on ESPN, on I think it's called Outside the Lines. It appears every day. There's a little video conversation that Joe and I had, so it's kind of cool, ESPN. Now, I've got all these CV things, but ESPN's the cool thing, and that's all I don't know how to put that on my CV. But what we're going to talk about on today is I'm going to tell you a lot about concussions, and I'm going to talk about it from the context of sports, as well as from the military and veterans, and also regular civilian folks like most of us. By the way, any veterans or active duty folks, thank you, of course, for your service. Not only does it pay my wages, but it's also a privilege to take care of y'all, so thank you. So we're going to talk about concussions. We're going to talk about what we've found so far and how you really should be treating them. If you like, I'll tell you whether or not you should let your children play sports and what you should do if you've had a bunch of concussions. I've had 6 in my life. I was a terrible athlete, all right, but I tried really hard, and I got a bunch of concussions all in about 2 years, and I realized that medicine would be a better future for me. And then we're gonna talk about, really how you should be treating folks in an integrative and holistic way, and we'll talk about what the research is in that area. And then we'll finish off with the large $62 million grant that I'm leading. It's a nationwide project to kind of look at what are the long-term effects of having repeated concussions, because that's a huge issue. And then how can we prevent that? All right, and it was interesting, on the flight over here, I sat next to a young lady whose father had just been diagnosed with a type of dementia. And of course, like an idiot, I said, I kind of do this for a living. And so we had about an hour and a half long conversation about dementias and about what you should do and stuff. And it was eye-opening, not because that happened to occur, that occurs a lot, but because the information she had been given by probably a very hardworking and bright neurologist wasn't even right. All right, really wasn't helpful to her. All right, was very scientific. Oh, we're going to do some tests, not about how your father should now approach life, what may be his prognosis, and how can he reduce his risk of this accelerating, all right, as well as familial issues. So it was eye-opening again that we really need to have a better awareness of this. We don't know a lot about the brain. It's one of these like Star Trek things, like the more we know, the less we know, or Spock can do surgery on his head or something like that. But it really is true. We really know very little. I'll try to share with you what I know and what we know in the world of literature. For disclosures, I always feel bad I don't have any. I'm really working hard to develop patents and to come up with famous things that I make a fortune off of. All right, I mean, I'm a federal employee as well as a state employee, and I have a wonderful living, but I don't have any disclosures. But hopefully next time I come here, I'll have some big windfall that I'm working on. I got a couple little gadgets, and they haven't hit yet, but eventually, and I have no patents. But anyway, I have no disclosures. All right, so the goals are certainly going to be give you the landscape of it, give you a broad brush of what's going on, and really kind of hopefully open your eyes about how prevalent this is and what things we do know. And then we're going to talk about, why is there suddenly this furor over the long-term effects of concussions? They've got some skulls of early man from 3.2 million years ago, and they can clearly see repeated brain injuries in Neanderthals and in Cro-Magnon men. All right, and they didn't die out as a race, or maybe that's why they did die out. Maybe they became extinct in the dinosaurs because they had repeated concussions. I'm pretty sure the answer is no to that, but this is something that's been around for a long time. There are 4 million concussions a year in this country alone, probably 15 million a year internationally, all right? And so in the last 20 years, some of these people had the same concussions twice, but in the last 20 years, let's say there have been 50 million concussions, all right? So there's some repeats. So that would mean, in 20 years, 50 million concussions, and people are really worried about people getting dementia from concussions, right? Well, nobody's talked about this. We haven't seen an upsurge. We haven't seen almost any dementia from concussions that we were aware of, right, in 20 years. And there's been 50 million of these. Right? In the current literature, there are about 90 case reports total of dementia associated with concussion. 90. All right? But 50 million people resulted in 90 dementia, maybe. All right? So the association between the two. And so it's not really this huge problem. But it pays me a lot of money as a grant because of this excitement. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So I wanted to start off by, we're going to go over some of the common myths But there is a linkage between brain injury and repeated brain injury and developing problems like dementia. There is a link. It's a really small link, all right? And it's no one in this room, because none of you are professional athletes, I'm pretty sure, are gonna get dementia as a result of concussions. And I'm saying this so I feel good about myself. No, you're not going to, unless you're just a very accident-prone person, but we'll talk about that as well. And we'll talk about the science backing that up. I've shared with you a lot of it right there. Our research group has the brains of 600 individuals that are deceased and that were either in professional athletes or in the military and had a lot of concussions. So we're looking at that now, and we've dissected 30 so far, and we found some interesting things, and we'll share that a little bit. And then we're going to talk about just research in general. All right? And don't be scared. I'm not going to go into like p-values and stuff like that. I have a little bit of animal stuff, but not a ton. I'm going to keep it very, very relevant to y'all. I should say that if you have questions, concerns, or if you disagree vehemently with anything I'm saying, do it during the lecture, right now. Not right now, but please raise your hand or blurt it out if you just can't wait. It's a long period of time we have together, and I always say I'm never going to take this long, but I really like to talk and engage. So I usually do, but I'll try not to. I'll try to get you out a little early. But please feel free to do it at any time during lecture. It won't throw me off. I don't have a pre-written lecture. I don't plan it out. It just kind of, it's very organic. It happens. My slides guide me, so you won't be interfering. But please, I don't want you to be holding something in or not understand something or disagreeing with what I'm saying. All right? So let's talk about some of these are six of the common myths that we throw out there. But I am going to then address HBOT, hyperbaric, because I'm going to forget that otherwise, because that's a good myth too. All right, so you can all read for yourself. All right, I'm not going to read them verbatim, but these are some of the things that have encouraged the federal government, the military, the VA, NIH as well, NIMH, as well as the NFL. To kind of move ahead with being much more concerned about brain injuries and about concussions. These are some of the things, and also these are some of the beliefs that are held, all right? And there's lots of other ones. I just picked these because there's actually specific information. And we'll visit these throughout the talk, and we'll summarize at the end. And in general, the answer is that these are false myths, but we'll go into that a little bit and talk about that. A common myth that's out there now, which is addressed in the ESPN article, that's going to be out tomorrow, is that there are a lot of, when you have a condition that gets well on its own, because about 95% of people that have civilian concussions, a single concussion, will be perfectly back to normal based on the current literature in 1 year, all right? About 80% will be well in 3 months, all right? Probably about 75% are well in 2 weeks, but when you have a condition that 95% get well, if you kind of treat them nicely or even ignore them, the body's very resilient. When you have that kind of condition, everything's gonna work if you give it to them, because nothing worked. So, just air, breathing, walking around seems to get folks well. I've had 6, I've never had treatment for them. You may figure out by the end of this talk that maybe I'm not fully cured, all right? But when you have something like that, it's really hard to understand, well, how do I know if this changed the course of it? How do I know if this had any effect on it, or was this just natural recovery? And I was going to do well anyway, all right? Now, you could argue we're going to try it on people with late injury, so years and years out. But if I were trying to study a treatment, you'd want to study it when you have the best chance of improving it, so you do it early, but we could look at both. But because of that, there's lots and lots of folks who are claiming that they can fix this problem, all right? And obviously, they claim they can increase the number from 90 or 95% wellness at a year to 99%. Or they can get it done more quickly. Or they can get it done in a way that is easier for the client, all right, whatever it is. Instead of having to do physical therapy or cognitive therapy, they can just do this treatment. They can rub some kind of holy oil on them or jump up and down on a vibrating beam or something like that. And some of those techniques may actually work. They may. But it's hard to study them, and in general, people don't study them, all right? Because, you're not dying of a concussion unless you commit suicide. And we have a wonderful psychiatrist who's in the room who would be very, very aware of the risks of having a brain injury and some psychological conditions that could result in suicide or addiction. So there could be a problem. But you've got a condition that in general is self-limited and does well. All right, and if the treatments are sort of benign and or relatively cheap, why not try them on everybody? All right, well, that's not a good way to practice healthcare. You know, that there's an ethical issue with that. But it really becomes an issue when there are treatments, and one of them is hyperbaric oxygen. All right, the Michael Jackson kind of thing, or the thing that you use for the bends. And we have a director of the hyperbaric program, or someone who's involved in the hyperbaric program here as well. So there's this thing, hyperbaric oxygen, which is essentially increasing the pressures that are in this chamber so that they're above the pressure of the atmosphere. In the case of brain injury, twice the atmospheric level is what folks are studying. And the folks that run these programs believe very strongly that it can fix a lot of things. All right, and some of those things are neurologic conditions: autism, cerebral palsy, some spinal cord injury, stroke, and the big one, obviously the reason I'm talking about it, is traumatic brain injury. Because there was a belief that our service members and some of our athletes are not doing as well as they should after these concussions, and they're saying they're actually not doing as well as the average civilian who just has a motor vehicle collision or some other problem. And so they're indicating it must be more complex, or it's the blast that occurred, which we'll talk about. But for whatever reason, they're not doing as well. That's their belief. And they said, we have a way to fix them. We're going to put them in this chamber every day, 5 days a week, for 8 weeks. We're going to give them 41-hour treatments. That's the standard. And we're going to get them better. And we've got some information that it works. And this is kind of exciting to have something that you can actually get people well who haven't been. And so the military and the VA said, there's 250,000 people that have had concussions from these conflicts. The NFL is like every player we've ever had has had a concussion from these conflicts. All right, and other people are saying, well, there's 4 million a year, and even if 90% get well, that's still X number that are going to have to be treated. And the FDA was like, wow, are we going Medicare? Are we going to approve this? So the military in particular said, we want to study this phenomenon now. And the military actually did it because they wanted to give it to the troops, but they weren't allowed to pay for it unless it was FDA approved. All right, they had to do certain studies to do that. And there's a certain way to do those studies. They're very rigorous. You have to do several of them. And they said, but we can't do it ourselves because it'll look like the military is trying to rig the system. So let's find a guy we can throw some cash to who will do these studies for us. So naturally, I raised my hand, and they gave me an appropriate amount of federal dollars to study this and to be involved with two other studies that were doing it. I was their consultants, right? So long story short, we had we have about 200 service members who all had concussion and were not recovering after 3 months. And we put them either into a chamber that had the right dose, a chamber that had half the right dose, or a chamber that had a sham or make-believe dose. It felt like they were under pressure, but they weren't getting any additional oxygen into their system. And we studied them beforehand with everything we could think of. Except for rectal temperatures, that's the only thing we didn't study, which may have actually improved. We studied everything, obviously related to their brain injury, related to some of them had PTSD, some had depression, anxiety disorders, some had specific symptoms, headache, dizziness, problems with eye tracking. So we studied everything we could. So about 200 folks in these 3 separate studies, but that were integrated. And what do you think we found? We found it didn't work. We found hyperbaric oxygen had the same effect as just being really nice to somebody and telling them you cared about them and giving them a nice, warm, therapeutic place to be, and indicating to them that they were going to do well, giving them a positive outcome, a belief in a positive outcome. So if you did that and just kind of made a lot of noise and put them in a cool box, they would have done or did just as well. All right, and I'm being a little facetious, but so we did 3 rigorous studies, and we were 0 for 3. Now, I was happy about it because I'd never seen people get well from hyperbaric oxygen for traumatic brain injury. But the military was actually disappointed because they want the magic bullet treatment. All right, now what they missed was the magic bullet may be in there, and that is if you treat people with positive expectations in a nurturing environment, and you kind of take them out of a stressful condition, whether it's pro sports or whether it's being in a military base and having to kind of work hard at that, kind of put them in a more controlled, more happy place. For my study that I specifically did, we brought them to Pensacola, Florida, to the base there, which is really nice, and it was in a nice part of the year, and they did well. So the answer is hyperbaric oxygen doesn't have any effect. Joe Namath doesn't believe that, and many other people who have a lot of power in lobbying don't believe that, and I get to be the sacrificial lamb each time, but hopefully you can read about it this week, but that is a myth that it has an effect. Right now we haven't found it, all right, for that one. Oh, let me use this. All right, so about 4 million of these things a year, and only about half of them go to the emergency department. I'm 0 for 6. I've never been to the emergency department ever, but certainly not for my concussions. I probably didn't even know I had them. There are 250,000 people that were having symptoms 3 months after their concussion. There's probably about 400,000 concussions that occurred in the conflicts. All right, the official number though is $250,000, but 250, that's too cheap. 250,000 people, all right, but about 400,000 probably had a concussion that was not reported, and they just did fine. All right, so there was a lot of folks with concussions. A small number compared to 4 million because the war was 15 years long, but still it was a significant period of time. I'm not going to assume everybody knows what a concussion is. I'm also not going to read this. In simple terms, because I've done this 100 times, a concussion is diagnosed when there's a force, what's called an impulsive force. All right, you could say concussive force, but you don't usually use the word to describe it. So an impulsive force, there was force that caused movement. All right, that force was sufficient to move the head. The head has to move. All right, and as a result of that head movement from that force, the individual has an alteration or a loss of consciousness. What does alteration mean? It means they had their bell rung, they were confused, they had a period of memory loss, they were dizzy, all right? They had a numbness over their body, which is a vague one, but so they were confused. I don't remember mine, but I'm sure I was confused. I was told by one of my, I was actually in the football game, not on the bench, look at the cheerleaders, I was in the game, and it was a running play or something like that, and I was a pulling guard, and I wasn't much bigger than this, so I shouldn't have been a pulling guard, and I ran into a wall of a man who eventually made it to the NFL for 10 seasons, so I don't feel that bad about it, and he crunched me, just destroyed me, all right, went straight back, all right, don't remember it that well, people told me this, right, and after that play, got right up, all right, went to the huddle, looked around, said, man, that guy destroyed, and I looked and I didn't recognize anybody's face. And I was concerned that perhaps I had gotten a much worse injury. And then I noticed their faces looked mad at me, and they started to push me. And I said, this is not very collegial. I mean, I'm not that bad. And I realized I had gone to the wrong huddle, the wrong team, because I had no idea what was going on. I was completely confused, all right? And so what did the coach do? This was back in the 1970s. What did the coach do? He yelled at me, Seafu, get over there. Didn't assess me, didn't take me out of the game, nothing. I went to the other huddle, all right, and I probably sucked the rest of the game. All right, but I had a concussion. I was so confused. I don't remember most of that. All right, but I still played through it. All right, and it probably was bad. But so I had no idea what was going on. Don't remember it. All right, didn't lose consciousness. Didn't vomit. Didn't have a headache. Just was confused. That's a concussion. All right, 90+% of them don't have any loss of consciousness. You're not unconscious, eyes closed. You're awake. You're talking. All right, that's a concussion. All right. And in football nowadays in the NFL, when that happens, they usually diagnose it. The reporters do in the field box as well as on the floor on the field as a neck sprain, because if you have a concussion, you can't play any more of that game, and typically you can't play for at least a week. We'll talk about that literature in a second. But if you say high neck sprain, you can play the next game. And you can actually stay, you can come back that game. So they're kind of doing that more and more. My younger brother owns part of an NHL hockey team. And so I've been involved with some of the concussions in the NHL and been into their locker room and talked to the guys. And most of the guys have had hundreds, if not thousands, of concussions. And very few of them ever got diagnosed with it or sat out. They have a lot of neck sprains in the NHL. Now, fighting is down 20% in the NHL in the last couple of years. They're happy about that. And that's good for concussions, but most of the concussions occur from the high speed. I mean, if you haven't been to an NHL game, first of all, the guys are massive, 6'3", 250, rock solid, some of the most attractive men I've seen in my life. All right, unlike NFL players, hockey players are buff, and they're all nice. They're all from Eastern Europe or from Canada, and they're just nice human beings. And they also have amazingly attractive girlfriends, which works out well. Good for breeding, I guess. But these guys are all getting this concussion, and they're moving so fast on the ice, and that puck is traveling over 100 miles an hour. The goalkeepers are having lots of concussions, all right, and they have lots of cool voodoo ways of trying to fix them. So concussions occur very commonly. It can be classified as just a disturbance of brain function or neurologic function as a result of trauma. So very common. How many folks in the audience, either before or after I describe that, have had a concussion in their life? Please don't let me be alone. Get it up high. All right, nice. That's not that many, all right? But there you go. There we go. He came out. It's like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. All right. To add to the joy of this research and this field is, football and driving a car fast and getting into an accident or falling from a height, or if you're a little older, falling from a little less height or falling from a depth, I guess. All of those things, result in some degree of force, all right? And with interest in research, we've been studying more and more, what is that force? How hard do you need to go to get a concussion? So they get these cool helmet sensors that during the football game, or in the case of the military, during war or during practice for war, we can record every time they get, their head moves too fast or their helmet moves too fast, we can record the exact force on that helmet. All right, and they've come up with a paradigm as to if you've reached this level, you're going to have a concussion. It isn't 100, but let's just say it's 100 for the sake of this discussion, right? So there's increasing numbers of research that are showing, that, and they use it a lot in the NCAA, but they're using it in the NFL a little bit. But there's a liability issue, because if you're recording this and you see this injury and the person doesn't come out, it's not very wise to do. But the coach never likes you if you take your players out. So I've watched these clips where these massive human beings, all right, usually NCAA, are having forces to their head that would make me dead. Forget about unconscious, dead, all right? All right, and these are people that are being monitored by trainers, all right? In the NFL and the NHL, there are lookers now, or scouts, who are paid by the teams to watch every player just to look for concussions. All right, so these guys are being watched, and the trainers are aware, and so these people are wired up, so we're aware of this. And you see this, I saw this one play, like two of the linemen get G-forces that a human couldn't survive, and then the linebacker gets nailed, and blah, blah. No injuries on the play, nothing, all right? But the forces are so high. And that has led people to say, you know what, maybe we don't know what that number is, but maybe also there are forces that occur to the head, or to any body part, in this case the head, that are causing damage to the brain, but it's not at a threshold that would present as a concussion. So the head is shaking around, and the brain doesn't like it, and we'll talk about the little brain parts that don't like it, but they're not symptomatic, all right? And so we're calling that a potentially concussive event. I'm not calling that. The researchers are, for some reason, they want to get more trouble. They're causing a potentially concussive event. And then there's the scare, maybe if you get enough of these subclinical or below symptom problems, they're going to add up too. And now we got to be thinking more than just, did I get an alteration of consciousness? Was I a little dizzy? Did I forget the play? But what was the G-force? What was the force on the helmet or on the head? All right. And the analogy is, if you know any carpenters or construction workers, all right, for 20, 30, whatever years, they're banging nails and digging ditches and stuff like that. And most of them have had a couple of injuries to their shoulder or their hands. But they've worked through it. It's no big deal, By the time they're 45, 90% of them have arthritic changes of their joints, of their shoulders, and usually the knuckles of their hand, from repetitive use, repetitive injury, even though they didn't really have symptoms, because they would stop when their hands started to hurt, or they get used to it. But the body is sensing that damage, and it's not a great analogy, but it's sensing that damage every day, or is having that injury every day, or that subclinical injury, and after X number of bangs with the hammer, or whatever that pile driver stuff is, or lifting, bales of, cement, not bales, bags of cement on your shoulder. And when you do that enough, you end up getting damage to your body. So this is the same concept. All right, now, what I believe is these people are just saying they didn't get the injuries, they want to keep playing. All right, because I don't think you can get 100 G force to your head, and it's not 100 G, but you can't get 100 on the scale, Newton, and not get a concussion. That's one belief, that these people are really when I talk to the NHL guys, they all describe this phenomenon, which in the NHL is called seeing orange. Never heard of that before. And seeing orange is code for having a concussion. They just didn't know what it was. Now, I didn't, because my brother doesn't want to overpay them. So I didn't fully describe to them what it was. I said, every time you see orange, you should let the trainer know that, because humans shouldn't see orange after being hit in the head, all right? And so some of these folks are just so used to getting these things that they don't report them. I mean, in part because they don't want to be pulled from the combat or from the action or lose their paycheck, because most players get paid only when they're playing. Most people aren't like Peyton Manning or Eli Manning. Their contracts ain't so good. My brother, trust me, he don't pay people if they ain't playing. All right, they get booted. And certainly through the end of the year they get paid. They won't get renewed next year, and they won't get picked up by other teams. So they've got a reason to. And as service members are similar. They do it for the country, for their platoon, for their group. They want to keep in the game or keep in the battle. So that's possible. The other thing is, these sensors are attached to the helmet, or sometimes are attached to a headband. Or there's a cool company that has it attached to a mouth guard, and that it only works when it's actually on the wetness of your gums. It's kind of cool technology, all right? And it can sense how fast the mouth guard is moving, all right? It's kind of neat. My brother actually invested in that firm. It lost money, but he invested in it. So I didn't get any money out of it. But probably these things are moving differently than the skull, all right? And that's what we're finding. Helmet cams, whether for the military or for the Army, or Navy, et cetera, for the DOD, are not as accurate as we think. The helmets are moving differently from the head. And the problem with the mouth guard is it's measuring velocity here, not in the brain. And there doesn't seem to be a correlation. So it's one of those two. But hopefully you'll never see this word, but that's what a PCE is. All right, and so I've got to worry about PCEs too. All right. The word concussion is equivalent exactly to mild traumatic brain injury. They are the same terms. They don't mean different things. Now, some people believe they do. I didn't make up the words. They are just 2 words, or 3, I guess, or whatever it is. A lot of words, 4. All right, but they are equal, exactly. All right, one isn't worse. All right, there are different degrees of concussions and of mild traumatic brain injuries, but they're all called the same. All right, I'm not going to go into the degrees unless you would like me to, but they're equivalent. And the injury is not caused by the force, all right, of hitting, all right? It's caused by the rapid acceleration and then deacceleration as you're in a car, you're being hit by something. If you're a lineman, you're going 25 miles an hour, and you're hitting another 300-pound dude, he's going 25, there's a physics thing here, and your head goes from 25 to 0 or negative really fast, boom. If you're in a motor vehicle and you're hit from behind, the force is rapidly back, and then it stops when you either hit the headrest or your neck no longer moves, all right, if it's in the front. And it's also the twisting or rotational forces if you're going side to side, all right? The brain is not set up to take that speed of acceleration and deacceleration, the force. And I'll tell you why in a sec. But it isn't the actual head hitting. Now, when the head hits, that's a bad thing too, all right? If it hits hard enough and it causes bleeding, it's more than a concussion. It's a moderate traumatic brain injury, all right? So we're not talking about that today, but when you actually get skull kind of damaging the brain, that's more than a concussion. So a concussion doesn't have a coup, well, this is maybe the last medical term I use, a coup contra coup, which means you move forward, you hit something, and you went backwards, you hit something. Coup contra coup means there's bleeding at those sites or there's significant damage. That causes a moderate to severe. Concussions are called mild because they are. All right? So it's just rapid movement, all right? And there's a couple reasons. The main reason is the gray matter, all right, the outer part of the brain is like jello, all right? It's gushy, all right, in a very medical scientific way. And the white matter is firmer, all right? It's less gushy, all right? So you got jello on top of clay, all right? And they're both moving at a certain velocity. Let's assume you're going 20 miles an hour. They're moving along, and you hit somebody in front of you. You weren't looking, all right? You got a seatbelt on, but your head isn't attached to the seatbelt. So it goes forward 20 miles an hour, hits the end of the neck, or hits the airbag or something, and then goes back a little bit, right? Well, the jello keeps moving a little bit faster or a little bit further than the clay, because it's gushier. It moves like that, all right? And right where the jello and the clay hit each other, there are blood vessels, and there's obviously an attachment between the two. All right, the gray is the cell bodies, and the white matter is the axons or the stretches from them that connect to the rest of it. At that point, there's shear force, there's stretch. The brain doesn't do well with stretching like that. neither do the blood vessels. So you get stretch injury to these white matter, to these axons, and sometimes to the blood vessels as well. If that's enough of a force, right, we don't know exactly what that number is, as I said. If it's enough of a force, then the brain doesn't function well for a couple seconds, minutes, or even sometimes longer. If it's significant enough, you get little punctate or small areas of bleeding, all right, petechial hemorrhage or punctate hemorrhage, little ones, all right, and that occurs right where those little blood vessels are. And on specialized tests, specialized imaging tests, x-rays, you can see those small areas, but it's really tiny, small, it's subtle. All right, so that's what's causing it. It's the rapid movement, acceleration, deacceleration. If any of you were forced as a child to eat fruit inside Jell-O or some other substance that's with Jell-O around it, my mom thought that was a cool thing to serve. I don't know why, I didn't like either of them, but we had to eat it. If you ever took that Jell-O and did what every kid did, was just play with it, all right? If you shook it, you saw little bubbles form in the Jell-O. It's kind of fun. If you did enough, it broke and you have to eat it, all right? But it moved. If you looked around the fruit that was in there, which represents the denser white matter, you'll see that there was separation between the Jell-O, which is the gray matter, and the fruit. That separation is a traumatic brain injury. So I was causing concussions in Jell-O at a very young age, all right? So, that's how you need to think about it. So helmets do nothing to prevent concussions. They're not for concussions. The only helmet, I was told by a helmet manufacturer, that would prevent concussions would weigh 3,000 to 5,000 pounds. So the person's head couldn't move, and their body wouldn't move, all right? What helmets do is prevent the skull from hitting, prevent skull fractures, prevent moderate to severe brain injuries, which is what was happening before they had helmets. And the NCAA, with advice from Theodore Roosevelt, President Roosevelt said, people are dying playing this sport in college, not a good thing long-term for tuition. All right, let's give them something. So they put the leather helmets first and then the plastic ones. They're great at preventing skull fractures. All right, same thing in the military. They're good at stopping bullets, sort of, or not having you crack your skull, but they do absolutely nothing for the concussion. Because if anything, they're adding more weight to the head, and more weight means more momentum, which means the acceleration difference between the two, white and gray, is going to be higher. So actually, helmets could, and you'll quote me if you like, could worsen concussions, all right? But they're not there to prevent concussions. They're there to prevent death and fractures of the skull. So, that was a lot of words to kind of tell you what a concussion caused it, but it's that simple or that complex. That's what it is. And again, please stop me all right, love this graph, okay? This should be committed to memory. No, I'm just kidding. There is a wonderful basic science researcher in the world of brain injury named David Hovda, who's at the University of San Diego, as well as at the VA there. Great guy, a mountain of a man, but he's very gentle. All right, and he was doing research in the 70s, 80s, he still does it, that looked at, in a rodent, what happens after concussion inside the brain? What's happening to the neurotransmitters and the other chemicals that are in the brain? And because it's really hard to ask a rodent if it's having a headache, or if it's dizzy, or if it wants to fight with its wife, all right, which are some common short and long-term complications that can occur after a brain injury. So you can't always tell. And they've got specialized, water mazes and tests, and they're not that great. They're good at cognition or thinking skills in rats, but it's really hard to imbalance a rat or a mouse. Like, they got 4 legs, and they're used to running away from cats and walking on string, and it's really hard to test 4-legged animals in balance, ask about headaches, sleep-wake cycles, not usually that interrupted. So the idea was, let's find biomarkers. Let's find something occurring in this case in the cerebral spinal fluid inside the skull that tell us what injury occurred and when does it get well. Hard to do in humans because to put probes inside people that have had concussions violates a lot of ethical issues because the risk is way higher than the gain. People with moderate severe brain injuries, we know this information, but for concussions, not so much, not at all. So anyway, Dr. Hovda, Dave was doing this research, and he found, there are worsenings or increases in certain neurotransmitters, which hopefully are there to help the brain. And some rodents that didn't do as well, the levels stayed up too high, and it was probably causing some secondary injury to the brain. But in general, the curve looked like this. It doesn't matter what the curve looked like. All right, but what he found out was that in about a week, these numbers were back down to baseline. We're back to normal in the majority of these rodents. particularly those that looked as good on these water mazes. So you know, his research was just that, you know, after, you know, in a rodent, in a rat, after a concussion, which is not on the battlefield, on the ball field, it's done in the lab, all right, in about a week, they're back to normal in terms of their values. He didn't say their balance was better or that their thinking was better, just these numbers were, right? So around this time, the NFL and NCAA, this is in the 80s, said, you know what, concussions probably are bad, the brain's important, we got to figure out when can these people go back to play, you know, because or back to battle, because, you know, we don't want to put them at risk, you know, and some of these guys say they're well in like a day. You know, if someone's dizzy and throwing up 6 weeks later, that's not a big question. If someone's seeing double, triple, you know, whatever, that's fine. But what if they feel good in 2 days? You know, what should we do? So they said, who's doing this research? There's this guy in San Diego. Let's call him. Let's ask him. And what Dave said, well, I only work with rodents. And typically, humans are at least 4 times as bad as rodents. I mean, that's a generic number, 3-4 times, but we don't even know. So, you know, take this with a grain of salt. All right, 7 days. That's what we find. All right, 7 days. Now, the answer should have been translated by the NFL. You know, it was actually in the 90s. Should have been translated to say, well, it's 7 days in a rat. It's got to be 3 to 4 weeks in a human. All right, even if they're symptom-free. You know, we got to be worried about this. And so how is it translated? What are currently the standards for return to play? 7 days. 7 days of symptom-free. All right? You know, they never looked at neurotrauma. So that's how that came about. It probably isn't accurate. All right? Even if they're symptom-free, there's still change. Just like, you know, if your skin is, after you get a cut, your skin is healed on the surface, there's still going to be things underneath that are being worked on, even if the skin looks good, or your bone, or your heart. You can take certain x-rays. You know, if you get a pneumonia, you take an x-ray. Well, you have evidence of pneumonia in the x-ray, you treat, and in a couple of days they feel better. But if you killed that person, which would be illegal, and then dissected them, you'd find that there's still some changes going on in that lung, probably for certainly days, if not weeks or longer, as it's repairing itself. All right, well, the brain's the same way. So the current standard for return to play is not really based on anything other than rodents. All right, and the Rodent Football League isn't out yet, so there's a concern about that. All right, there's a concern about it, and it probably should be closer to a month. And so clearly, the NFL and NHL and the military would say we can't keep people out for a month, Dr. Seafu. I mean, it's only their brain. We got to get them back on the field. I'm being a little facetious, but you know that's one of the concerns we have about the current return to play. It's not based on any science, all right, or it's based on science that really isn't valid for this population. All right? But it's interesting. It's an exact biblical number. It's 7 days. That always sells well with the public, and amazingly, it's the exact period of time between games in the NFL. It really worked out well. Although if you think about it, if they get an injury at 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. at this game, you know, and let's say they're symptom-free, they're not longer dizzy, 20 minutes later, which is really fast. So 5 p.m. Well, next week's game is at 1. That isn't quite a week. So they're not even following the rules, all right? And most players aren't symptom-free the same day. It's the next day they feel better, or 2 days later. So, and around the Super Bowl, everybody's head gets better really fast, or there's a lot of neck sprains, all right? And I'm a fan of the NFL and all these things. I love it. It's just that, you know, it's tough as a researcher when you look at this, or as a human being, you look at this, or as a parent whose kid may be playing football, all right, or lacrosse or cheerleading, which is a very high-risk sport, actually, for brain injuries, and it's based on rodents. So what we call this injury is diffuse axonal injury. All right, the person who coined that, who I work with in Richmond, John Pavlichak, actually now says it's focal axonal injury, because it isn't throughout the brain, and that's what diffuse implies. And he used that name for a more significant injury, a moderate injury that had lots of these little petechiae or small areas. Because in a traumatic brain injury, it tends to occur right at the gray-white junction. It tends to occur in the frontal parietal kind of region. It doesn't occur all over. But diffuse axonal injury is just what I described, the jello thing, all right? And here it is on the left slide. You can see the little arrows. Thank God the arrows are put in there, are pointing to there are little holes there, all right? And that's where there's been some bleeding on this CT scan. The person on the on this MRI, this person on the right didn't live. So this is more than just a concussion, but this can occur just from acceleration, deacceleration injury. In this case, it's occurring in the deep brain structures, resulting in death, but it's these little areas of bleeding. So blood in the wrong part of the brain can cause death. In the right part of the brain, or just from rapid movement without bleeding, can cause confusion. So location is everything. Extremely well studied in rodents in terms of what happens after axonal injury in terms of the time course. We can monitor it acutely. We see specific changes similar to Dr. Havda's work. It's been reproduced many, many times. We've got specialized stains to look for it. We know what happens in rodents. We imagine this is true in humans as well. Now, there are some humans, obviously, who have had concussions and then died of other problems in their body. They died of heart trauma or collapsed lungs, and so we were able to look at their brains. Not a lot of them, and so we're seeing it paralleled. But again, facetiously, we can't kill these people who live at 1 week and 6 weeks and 6 months as we can in rodents, not kill, sacrifice. We can't do that to look for this. So we imagine it's similar, but the rate of improvement is probably going to be altered or much longer. All right. So we know this very well, but what we don't know is from what we see on rodents and the small number of humans is why people don't just get better, because 99% of people, and animals, if you look at their brains, it looks pretty good in about 2 weeks. All right, you don't see elevations. I mean, again, maybe 4 weeks, fine. If you want to do the 4 times number for Havda's work, their neurotransmitters are looking good. There's no more bleeding, or there wasn't any. There's never swelling in the brain. If there's swelling in the brain, it's 99% a moderate traumatic brain injury. So these people don't have this massive injury, don't have reasons to it. And yet we see a percentage still have problems at 3 months. But by 6 weeks, everything should be gone, certainly by 4 weeks. So we don't actually understand why some people continue to have symptoms. I'm going to take a guess. I'm going to talk about it today. But we can't, there isn't a physiologic reason, because this is a very mild injury. All right? If I slap my arm really hard, it hurts for a little bit. If I cut it, it hurts for longer. If I break a bone, it hurts for longer. But there's a period where you can evaluate me and say, it's completely healed and my arm's fine. But there are some people that continue to have pain after a little scratch on their arm, or continue to have achiness in a joint after a fracture, but everything looks good. So this occurs in humans a lot. All right, but when it occurs in the brain, it's more challenging to look at, and we have to kind of figure out why are there subsets of people. In some cases, it's up to 30% are still having symptoms. Usually, it's more like 15% at most are still having symptoms at 3 months. Most common symptom acutely is headache. Next is dizziness. All right. After that, it's going to be problems with memory and thinking. That's acutely, meaning right at the time. Certainly they can also have problems with double vision, with nausea, vomiting, problems with changes in hearing. They can have a thing called tinnitus, where there's roaring in the ears. Long term, or so 4 weeks, 3 months, same kind of symptom spectrum. Dizziness kind of goes away in most of these folks, or isn't as common. Headaches is still number 1. Sleep problems becomes number 2. But then we start to see behavioral issues, meaning problems with irritability, poor frustration tolerance, in some cases anxiety or depression. So these people are still having these difficulties. Right away we can kind of get it. Head's got some, disconnection in it between the axons. There's a little bit of bleeding, plus musculoskeletal. If your head has been whipped or whiplashed back and forth enough, side to side or back and forth, so that the brain is actually jelloed out on us, well, the muscles that support that thing at the end of your neck, that high neck sprain, are going to be stretched rapidly as well. And no matter how strong you are, big your neck is, you can't prevent the head from moving. All right, and those muscles can't take that. Or now how much yoga you do, and how much loose your neck is, all right, how drunk you are. All right, it's still, you're not supposed to move that far, that fast or that far. So you're going to get stretch injuries of the muscles, all right, as well as a soft tissue around those muscles, the fascia. All right, so that alone can cause headaches, can cause dizziness. There's some literature, there's some science that says that just having neck pain can cause thinking difficulties, memory, attention. Makes some sense, right? So that could be a secondary reason why these people are having all these problems, all right, acutely. But again, muscles are supposed to heal by 6 weeks, by 2 weeks often. all right? And except for these people that either have a lawyer or believe that having their neck immobilized at some height is going to make them better, which doesn't work at all. But it's kind of cool. You go in the next day with a cane and this thing, maybe for a day, but after that you got to get rid of it. But so this is a secondary factor, but even then after 6 weeks, that should be healed. But people continue to have this, so we don't know why, all right? Now, I think the slide coming up, or next is, will tell us why, but after this is, so these are the things. You can have everything wrong with you acutely and long term. And there are some in the military and the VA who note that, after like 2 to 6 weeks, these people start to look like the average population that is having complaints. They look a lot like people with chronic fatigue syndrome, people with chronic pain, people with fibromyalgia. They don't look like it's the brain affecting this. It's sleep problems. It's emotional difficulties. It's memory dysfunction, but we see that in pain as well. We see it in chronic fatigue. We see it in the average Joe. All right, many of you, and I won't point you out, it's obvious. No, many of you may have some symptoms today. Headaches or some dizziness. You might forget things like, where are my keys? You may be annoyed at a loved one. All right, but probably most of you didn't have concussions in the last 1 to 6 weeks, but you have those symptoms. So these people do start to look like the regular population. But because they had an event, they're attributing those symptoms to this condition. It's not saying that it didn't somehow contribute, but it's hard to tease that out. And so there's an increasing belief that it's the failure to acutely or right away manage these people, both in terms of telling them, you know what, here's what happened to your brain in simple terms. You got a great chance of doing well. We're going to get you quickly mobilized, get you back into your life. We ain't going to sit you out for a week if you're a kid in school. We're not going to do that. It doesn't work. That's what my brother's team was doing. They were sitting the guy in their house in these dark rooms playing video games all day. I'm like, do you think they're going to get well? They get good at video games, but they get headaches like crazy, dizziness. Video games move too fast for the eye when you've had a brain injury of any type, so you get even worse dizziness. All right, and these guys are awesome at video games. All right, but at that point they're not. So rather, if we give you appropriate psychoeducation at the time of your injury, meaning we tell you, here's what happened. Here's exactly what we think will happen in the next couple of days. We predict your problem, but we're gonna beat it. We're gonna rapidly get you mobilized. We're gonna make sure you're eating well. We're gonna help you with your pain if you have it. We're gonna help you to sleep. If you think you're having memory problems, we're gonna remind you that maybe you didn't always know where you left your keys. We're not gonna have you worry about it. We're gonna mobilize it. And it was the best study ever done in the history of concussion was done about this phenomenon. What should we tell people right away, early on? All the bad things that can happen. Explain to them in regular English about what transpired, what could happen, but also tell them, man, you're lucky. It was only a mild brain injury. You've got a great chance. It's a concussion, actually. I like using that word. We're going to get you better quickly. Most of it's going to be natural recovery, but we're going to mobilize you. If in three days you're not better, here's an appointment to see a specialist in traumatic brain injury. All right? Or you can come back and see me, not the ER doc, but a primary care doctor. All right, if you're still having problems, we're going to do some more testing. We're not going to do any testing right away, other than making sure you don't have a more significant injury. Nowadays, acute CT scans are not recommended, nor MRIs for sure. All right, but back then they were doing some CT scans, some head scans. We're going to do that. And then we're going to have another group randomly selected that we're just going to say, yeah, it's too bad you had that injury. I don't know much about it. They didn't say it this way, but here's a sheet of paper. And for some reason, don't sleep tonight. I have no idea why that's ever recommended. Keep your kid awake all night. Why are we doing this? All right, and keep a person that's had an injury awake. They see that in every movie too. The guy's bleeding to stay with me. No, go to sleep, dude. You're bleeding like crazy. Go to sleep. I got you. All right. Same thing with a brain injury. The kids, you're going to keep him awake. His head's hurting. He's like spitting up blood. Yeah, stay awake, because then both of us will feel really good in the morning. And you'll be good, all right? Let the kids sleep. Now, the reason they do that is because sometimes children can't report their symptoms. But if they've had a moderate injury, first of all, you scan all kids, and they're not. If they're not bleeding, then their chances of bleeding are really small, unless they have a history of cocaine use, which most little kids don't. All right, so we're pretty good about that. All right, but don't let the kid go to sleep. All right, now you can monitor him. Most parents will. You're going to make sure little Johnny isn't doing, his head isn't spinning around or something. So they had these two groups, a lot of information, very supportive, warm handoff. I'm here for you. Here's my cell phone number. Hug it out. The other group, kind of like we're a busy ER. We're very professional. But you look good. here's a sheet of paper, here's some general information. And the concern was, well, if you tell people their problems, if you explain it too much, they're going to have those. They're going to think that they're dying of something. Or that was the belief, that was the hypothesis. And what did they find? Obviously, they found the opposite. Fantastic study, very strong information. That if you give people a positive outlook on their recovery after a concussion, they do twice as well, short-term and long-term. That kind of positive expectations, that kind of makes us think, what? There's a psychological component to this. That there's a part of this that if we manage it appropriately, then we're going to have a much better chance of having a good outcome. So there's a psychological component that probably kicks in right away because it's scary to have your head hurt. Now, some people don't seem to, are used to it. You can still give them a positive expectation, but they're used to getting brain injuries. They know they do well. All right, self-selected. All right, but it's interesting that this is something that certainly from the chronic standpoint, we don't really find any permanent damage to axons in folks that die of this, and certainly in animals. So there's a secondary factor again, whether it's chronic pain from muscles that aren't well rehabilitated, or whether it's due to psychological phenomena that aren't well rehabilitated. All right. So. All right, sports concussions, very little good research. There's 100,000 athletes in this country, NCAA and professional sports, and we have a great opportunity to study them, but nobody really wants to do that well. Even the NFL and the NCAA, they want to do it, but if you do it well, you know what you're going to find? It's really bad to hit your head a whole lot of times when you're like 16 years old. I don't need that much research background to figure that one out. All right? And the NFL and the NHL are like, if we study this and we find this as a problem, sort of like the tobacco industry, we're causing this. So even though they're about to pen a check for $20 billion for the lifetime care of people from the NFL that develop long-term problems and concussions, we don't want to admit that that's causing it. We're going to say, we love you, and we just want to throw some cash your way. We'll buy you a car or something like that. We're going to give you 20,000, or I think it's $20,000 each they're going to give them, or some number. All right? But they never admitted they did it, because if they admitted it, it's a workers' comp injury, and it's lifetime care for lots and lots of things. So the NFL agreement that's going to come out didn't include the Players Association, because we want lifetime benefits for these people for everything, and so we just cashed it out. All right, the NHL is going to do the same. The VA is taking a different approach where they provide lifetime benefits for the concussion stuff. But from a sports standpoint, we really don't know if these injuries are somehow different than a civilian one or a military one. And we also don't know what's the threshold. How many concussions do you have to have these chronic problems, or as we'll get to shortly, the dementia that some people talk about? Because it's not a single concussion. There is, by definition, if the concussion were bad enough, it wouldn't be a concussion, it would be a moderate to severe injury. And if you get one of those, you do have some lifetime risks of dementia and other problems. But one concussion, no way. Never going to happen. You heard it here. 6, no way. All right? What's the number? Is it an absolute number? Is it how old you were when it occurred? Is it how soon between two concussions? In the NFL, sometimes it's every other day they were getting concussions. The highest risk for concussion in professional sports is scrimmages and practices, where there's not Hawkeyes looking at you. And if you don't practice, you don't play in the game, so they really want to practice. All right? So they've changed the rules, so that's diminished. But they get a lot. They were getting sometimes several a week. All right. If you haven't read the book League of Denial, which is this whole thing I'm talking about, it's written in very layman's terms. It's based on specific NFL players. It was also a wonderful 2020, I think it was 2020, documentary, League of Denial. Wonderful. But what it talks about is you need to get thousands of concussions to be at absolute risk. All right. Soft science, but thousands. So I'm good with 6. Don't know if the numbers are, the most I've seen in a veteran is 151. All right, most of them probably not validated, not real. They were real, but they weren't actual concussions. They were just being close to an explosion or a scary event, and they may have developed some behavioral issues at the same. They may have had some stress related to that. So we don't know much about sports stuff other than it looks like everything else. But importantly, sports concussions are associated with stress and PTSD, just like military ones, as are motor vehicle collisions. Not quite the same, because people don't die on the football field for the most part. They do die in car accidents, whereas that risk of death is there, is pervasive in the military and in combat. But it's stressful because it's your job. And there's 3 guys who want your job, and it's your paycheck, and it's the only skill you have often. It's a great skill. I don't have it. But that's their only skill, is hitting people hard, all right, or shooting a gun. And they want to keep that job. So it's stressful to not be able to do it. I already mentioned that some of the techniques that are used in sports are really not science-based, and really they just treat symptoms. We don't actually know how you should treat it. I just finished a meeting 2 weeks ago to rewrite the concussion clinical practice guidelines for the military and the VA. We published it in 2009. It's only 180 pages, very user-friendly. We have a new one coming out that's going to be shorter and have pocket cards. It's available for free online. Just put in DoD VA Clinical Practice Guideline, mild TBI. You'll get the 2009 version. I'm supposed to finish by the end of this week most of the 2015 ones, so we're working on that. But they're very symptom-based. We don't have science to say who's at risk, what should we be treating them with. And really, 99% of acute concussion care can be done in a primary care setting without specialization, even with most of them without any specialized therapist. More long-term, if they still have symptoms 4 to 6 weeks out, particularly in sports, but in any condition, then we refer them to someone who has more special skills. Combat concussions, that's what I'm getting paid a lot of money to. No, I'm not getting paid. That's what our center is getting paid a lot of money to do. That's what we study. We agreed 2 weeks ago that the blast-related concussion has no differences than a sports concussion or a motor vehicle concussion or a non-blast military concussion. The blast wave, in terms of concussion injuries, mild injuries, has no difference than non-blast. So we can push that aside. All right, there have been not great studies, but enough to say we don't see any differences. If it's a big enough blast to cause limb loss and to cause a moderate injury, yeah, I'm thinking there may be some differences. But for concussion, no. All right, so combat concussions, the number is about 8% of all folks that were in the conflicts had a concussion with symptoms that did not fully improve. So 8%, and there's about 2.6 million people. All right, so the very conservative number is 150,000, but 250,000 is closer to the number when we look at about 12%. So this is the number of people that had a concussion and didn't get well. All right, and that's about 40% of the whole one, so 60% got well quickly. So the number adds up to about anywhere between 250,000 and 400,000 folks. And here's the reason we've currently screened 1 million people. There were 2.6 million people who fought, but only half or a little less have come into the VA system. So eventually it'll be 2.6 million people times 12% to give you the numbers. All right, and it's probably even higher than that. And that's just symptomatic, folks. It's another 60% who are asymptomatic. More than half of the injuries that occur in the 15-year second Gulf Wars were due to car accidents in theater. Some of those car accidents were caused by munitions, but most of them are just people driving too fast and inappropriately. Not as sexy as a blast injury in IED, so that wasn't as reported, but so they even look more and more like civilians. And about 3/4 of the people that have concussions also had PTSD diagnosed at 3 months, all right, using standard appropriate batteries. So this is not, again, we don't know that number for the NFL or for motor vehicle collisions. It's a lot higher than we would anticipate. It's usually more like 30% for civilians who get into significant enough trauma to cause a concussion. And again, it could be the trauma. It could be how you perceive the trauma. It could be the fact that your salary is going away. It could be that the guy is taking your place in the bench. All right, it doesn't have to be the actual someone blowing up or you're seeing a near-death experience. If you add chronic pain into that at 3 months, 90% of people will have either chronic pain or PTSD and concussion. So those conditions have very, very similar symptoms. And if anybody here's got chronic pain or a stress disorder or depression, it's really hard to function. So imagine if you had that and then you had a diagnosis of concussion. It would be hard to figure out what came first, what caused what, and what you currently had. All right, so that's the complexity. I was asked in May of 2007 to come up with a quick screener for concussion for the VA. So I did it over a weekend, and that's what we've been using since April of 2007. Fortunately, eventually they validated it. I just kind of made it up, but it was pretty clever, I thought. And we've done it on now like 1 million veterans, and eventually we're going to do it on 2.6 million if they all come into the system. And here are the numbers. We track this every week. The last number was 935,000 have been screened. It's always 7.7 to 8% have persistent symptoms. So it's the numbers I said earlier. But we track this closely. This is from a paper. This talks about how it's really hard. Less than 9% of the concussions that we're seeing in the VA and the military just have a concussion, don't have a secondary mental health disorder. All right? And again, anybody that's got a mental health disorder, and we can certainly put chronic pain syndrome into that, no, it's hard to function just with that alone. It may be irrelevant that they had a concussion, or it may be very relevant. It may magnify their symptoms. That's what we're trying to study and figure out. So lots and lots of data on what seems to be the problem. I'm really good at figuring out what the problem is. Fixing it, not so much. We're going to work on that. Importantly, when we look at the wars, it's important to understand how depression, PTSD, pain are much larger issues in terms of the number of individuals involved than concussions. I don't say that too loudly because I'm a concussion researcher, but clearly you need to be aware that the only side that wins in war are the healthcare providers, because we get lots of research done. They give us lots of grants, and we're kind of praised that they hire us a lot. Both sides, they get a lot of injuries. All right, one death is too many, but look at some of these numbers. All right, we've got about 40% of folks have chronic pain who are in the VA system from the conflicts. About 30% have PTSD long term. I already mentioned blast injuries really are off the table now. All right, it's devastating to be close enough to a blast to have a significant burn, amputation, spinal cord injury, moderate to severe TBI. I'm not talking about that. But if you're far enough away where what happened is you kind of were blown over, or you were knocked into the Jeep, or the Jeep flipped over, also terrible. But the blast wave, the under pressure, overpressure that people hear about, you see in Steven Spielberg movies where their heads blow up, that doesn't appear to be a factor in this, and it doesn't change the outcomes. So if you hear blast, you get worried, or not worried about it, but if that's in your thought process, we really haven't found much. This is the only article that suggested there may be a difference from Christine McDonald. She's part of our research group as well. She's out in Seattle, University of Washington. Love Christine. This data is a little flawed because only about at least 46% of the patients had a rollover injury at the same time. So they were in a Humvee and it flipped over. Well, and the windows were shut. There ain't no blast waves going into the exhaust pipe. Probably 99% had more than a blast injury, all right, if that many. But and we're continuing this research now to try and validate it. We're gonna now touch on some of the care issues. Let me pause. Are there any questions? And if people need bio breaks, please take them. Leave the room, of course, but please take those. And we're going to talk about some care issues, and we're going to kind of, and then finish with some of the dementia issues. The military is really good at keeping people alive after significant injury and in mild injury. They're always better at severe injuries because that's people bleeding, people having limb loss. You work on that. They weren't so good at first because they weren't aware that there were all these concussions occurring. Just like in sports, they kind of said, let's get back in the game, I've seen worse, or the guys didn't report it, or they didn't know what to do, whatever it was, because it hadn't been pervasive, even though there have been concussions in every war known to man. All right? Gulf War syndrome is related to concussions, PTSD. Soldier's heart, World War I, concussion, PTSD. All right? Shock, what is it? Shock. Shell shock, PTSD, concussion. Every war. All right? If you read the Bible, I'm not a Bible scholar, but if you read the Bible, and if you look at it, they express how some of the soldiers were dazed after this battle, all right? And they thought they were dazed because the Lord came down and blah, blah. They were getting banged on the head with metal, all right? They were being knocked over into walls, all right? And so concussions and the stress that can accompany battle has been around forever. Military is good at keeping people alive. After about 5 years, about 2005 to 6, they started to get, earlier than 5 years, they started to get even better at being aware of it. All right, now that happened to coincide with my involvement, so I'm going to take full credit for that. And they said, we need a system to treat them acutely in Afghanistan and Iraq. We also need a system to bring them back home and manage them once they get here. And so they have a great system to move people through. I'm in Richmond, which is 2 hours south of Walter Reed and Bethesda in Washington, and so we were one of the larger centers to get these folks both moderate severe injuries and amputations, but also these concussions. We had them in our shop. At first, it took about 6 to 8 weeks. But around 2009-10, took about 2 weeks to get them with significant injuries from Afghanistan to Richmond, as well as other places. So they got really good at doing that, and we saw improvements in outcomes. Obviously, life and death, but and severe function, but also some of these symptoms as well. So rapid mobilization, rapid treatment is key. This is a very pretty map which shows where there are VAs in this country. There are 151 VAs, 652 clinics, outpatient clinics, that are separate from that. And the bigger the circle, the more brain injury resources occur. There are 5 big red circles, one of them in Richmond. Those have everything. They're under the sun for the care of brain injury. Everything from coma, which is a dirty word now, but people in a period of disorder of consciousness or coma, to just concussions, not just, to concussions, everything. All of these sites have concussion programs that are scripted and that are in theory uniform. They're not always uniform. All of them, 110 of these sites have full interdisciplinary rehab teams focused on traumatic brain injury that have at least 8 team members on them. Right? Now, I'm bragging and stuff. There's lots of flaws. You've read in the paper. The VA has issues. All right? All right. Most of those issues are not specific to brain injury, otherwise I probably wouldn't have my job still. We excel, but we're all part of a team. And so clearly there needs to be improvement, but lots of money was put behind this, lots of research is being done, and the outcomes that we're getting are as good, if not, and or better than the academic world that's published. I'm also an academic brain injury guy. My program is 4 miles away. I'm the chairman over there. I'm the head over in Richmond. We get better outcomes in Richmond VA than we do at my academic place. And our academic place is very, very good. We're part of another research team that looks at that. So it's a tough population, and a war population is tough for anything, not just brain injury. It's tough for primary care. It's tough for mental health care. It's tough for orthopedics. But there's an integrated system out there so we can study it fairly well. What the integrated system has concluded, all right, is in this completely underselling book that I wrote, all right? And trust me, I make zero off of this book. But this book talks, and the concept is we need an integrated medicine approach to care. We don't need specialized x-rays. There are no pills that are going to magically fix concussion. There's no hyperbaric oxygen or electrical stimulation or transcranial magnetic stimulation. There's no surgery, all right? What we need is an understanding of the natural course of the natural history, an understanding of how a person's overall health and wellness, particularly their mental health, affects it, an understanding of how appropriate diet and regimented exercise, an understanding of how mindfulness or relaxation, an understanding of return to thinking activity, cognitive activity, as well as physical activity as early as you can is vital. An understanding of being in a therapeutic and supportive environment, whether that's your home, whether that's a lovely hospital, whether that's a wellness center. I don't care where it is, but it needs to be supportive. It can't be you're faking it, you're just trying to get money, why don't you go back and fight with your buddies? I've seen worse. When you do that, they always do worse. It's called Vietnam 101. When we surround them in a supportive environment, and not just, it's not like flowers and like coffee, or not too much coffee, the stimulus is too bad, but not just that, it's, we are going to appreciate that the entire body was injured, and the brain's part of that body, an important part, but man, if you're carrying a little too much weight, or you're not sleeping well, or your bowels don't move well, or you're not taking the appropriate nutrition, or you're eating like most Americans, if McDonald's is like your home cooking, all right, then you're not going to do well. If you don't feel comfortable practicing some relaxation strategies, whether it's mindfulness or plenty others, if you don't feel in touch with how your body's doing, if you think taking a pill every time you have a headache, or you don't sleep well is the answer, you're not going to do well. Some of those interventions, pills, are maybe appropriate in the first week or so. But after that, we have to figure out how to get them off some of the medicines, not on them, all right? And again, the problem with what I just said, it's 100% accurate, and it's written unbelievably well in this book, all right? Trust me, you ain't gonna buy it. All right, unbelievably well in this book is that it's not very sexy to tell someone, take care of yourself. You've got an injury that's complicated. Looks like you've got some traumatic stress disorder. You've got some problems with some headaches. You're having a hard time finding a job. Your loved one is alienated. You know, I just watched the Sniper movie on the plane coming over here. Pretty cool, pretty close. You're out of your environment, all right? And you got to kind of get back to being a regular functioning human being. Get back into your place in society. That's all right. Any of you could say that. You don't need the stuff that I do to have said that. I think I said it very articulately, but you don't have to kind of do all that, all right? There's no pizzazz in what I'm saying, all right? And so people don't do it. People want to get transcranial magnetic stimulation. They want to get a shot. They want to be inside a chamber or vibrated or something like that, all right? And so it's hard to get people to engage in just overall wellness, all right? And that's one of the challenges. Now, in order to try to combat that, we started a pilot program of integrative medicine at a number of the polytrauma centers. And actually, my co-author in this is one of our health coaches who's got specialized training in movement therapy as well as relaxation. And big surprise, they did better. They did better even in these special brain injury centers if they had this integrative medicine. And in a nutshell, integrative medicine means instead of calling relaxation therapy, acupuncture, mindfulness, yoga, instead of calling that alternative medicine and saving it for the people that haven't done great with Botox and pills, all right, and calling this something weird, calling this is mainstream, this is the US, this must be the right way. This is the East. It's a little weird, all right? Instead of doing that, say we're going to bring it together and figure out this is our entire palette, and for my painting to look good, I'm going to use the right type of paint from each of these as one. Every color is equal. Right? That doesn't mean it doesn't mean we're just burning incense and singing hey la li la. We're combining everything, and we're doing it with clinicians that appreciate that everything may be an answer at the right time, or nothing maybe. Overtreating people is maybe just as bad. When we did that, headaches got better quicker, sleep got better quicker, people got out of the programs more quickly. So integrative medicine, used to be called holistic, used to be called other things, is just saying we better get the whole palette. And the biggest part of the palette is the brush, is the person or persons delivering it. And so if you're kind of brusque with your patients, or you kind of have heard this 1,000 times, and you're not open to their suggestion, you're not willing to practice mindfulness with your patients, or you're not in good shape, all right, and you're not, you're practicing what you're preaching, the painting ain't going to come out so good, right? Doesn't mean that some of the high technology stuff used early on, and for those cases that may have some unusual secondary difficulties, may not be appropriate. You may need to revisit it if a person's having symptoms that just aren't responding even to this integrative program. But let's not lead with that. Don't lead with the image or the high-tech technology. Lead with this fantastic book, which I'll sign. But lead with normalizing people, getting them back to their lives, getting them out of institutions. And institution means a clinic. It doesn't mean the monkey house. It means just get them back to their life, get them back to working, being a husband, going to church, all right, a volunteer, whatever it is, getting back to the military. Certainly return them to work. And I think we were saying 2 days ago at a meeting that return to work interventions, vocational rehabilitation, specifically supported employment, well studied in many populations in the world of mental health, as well as in spinal cord injury, and now increasingly in traumatic brain injury. Supported employment, simple, have a relatively unskilled, but they're wonderfully brilliant people, unskilled person, bachelor's trained, work with a person specifically in obtaining a job, shaping them for the job, works wonderfully. 1-to-11 ratio, every dollar you put in, you get $11 back in wages or in saved medical costs. Get people back to their role, all right? Even when they're not perfect. I'm far from perfect, and I do my job pretty well, all right? Perfection's overrated once you reach a certain age. And after you've had certain injuries, you may never get back to perfect. Or you may not even remember what perfect is, all right? Or you may have problems. And I'm not diminishing. The VA will give you this care for free. You'll get a check if you have these difficulties, whatever it is. But let's get back to activity. Because coming to see me for 2 years is a complete waste of time. Really. I'm fun to be with in the clinic. People feel better afterwards. I tell them brilliant things. It hasn't helped anybody after like 6 months. I don't even want to see them. I mean, I like them, it's nice and stuff, makes me look like I'm an important person, but really, get out of the hospital, all right? Get out of the doctor role. At some point, you got to say, you know what? I'm going to have your primary care take care of you to make sure you're staying well overall. Here are the things to work with. You know, if you ever want to come back and see me, I'm always there. But really, you know, you've learned as much as I know. And I'll give you a copy of the book for free. All right? I'm kidding. There's a lot of books like this. This one, yeah. Oh, sign, that's a given. No, it's a given. All right. I mentioned this already. You know, they're very similar, combat and sports. All right, there's some little differences here, but very, very similar in civilian as well. I'm not going to belabor that. I'm going to get to the good stuff. Motor vehicle collisions, very similar as well, stress-related. Certainly, combat injuries have more acute stress issues. And you know, one of the challenges is if you got a brain that's not working perfectly well before a concussion, all right, just like if you have a back that's not perfect, and then you're in a car accident, you have a higher risk of having a back problem, particularly a long-term one. If you've got a brain that's anxious because it's in a war zone, that's in a body that hasn't been sleeping well because it's on a cot, that's eating some of the rations that may be not perfectly healthy, that's not, and then you're in a setting that doesn't allow you to be physically active, may not allow you to imbibe if you like to do that lightly. You may have diminished sexual activity because you're in your camp. You get all these reasons. Your brain's a little bit inflamed. It's not happy. It's stressed. All right. Then you have a concussion on top of a brain that's not functioning normally. All right. Even if you didn't have the concussion and you just developed stress because you're in the stress zone, or your buddy died, or you're in a near-death experience, just that alone will cause changes on some of the testing we do in brain injury for the first 3 months once you come back. So your brain is getting fried in the military setting. All right? And what does that mean? We shouldn't have wars. That would be one approach. That's Dave's approach. All right? The other approach is be aware of that. And just like in the sniper, when they come back, expect a period of up to 3 months of transition. But the point of this was, what if you have a brain like that and then it gets concussed, it gets shaken around? You're likely to have worse problems. So we don't typically we all have stress in our lives, but the stress that we have in America isn't quite the same one as when you're in combat. Neuroimaging, amazingly expensive, amazingly cool, high tech. There really is no good neuroimaging for concussion. And we're studying it all. All right, diffusion tensor imaging, who cares? DTI, which is a type of MRI scan, is current gold standard. It's okay. It's as sensitive as it gets. The cool hair thing there, high definition fiber tracking, which actually tracks individual axons, white matter, is cool as heck, has no clinical utility yet. Nothing. It may eventually pan out. I don't think so, but we're studying it, whatever. You know, a SPECT scan, which is something that looks at the metabolic activity of the brain, people advocate, has no value whatsoever. So if in doubt, don't ask about scans. The answer is it's not really very useful. It's used when the person doesn't get well to rule out other unusual conditions. All right? But it's not very useful. There's a list, and I think you can go online or wherever and get copies of this, or you may have it. Diffusion tensor imaging is the gold standard. All right, it can show little areas of problems with the axons where the injury is, but nobody in this room needs an X-ray to diagnose this. You know how you diagnose it? You ask the patient. Tell me what happened. All right. Now the reason they come up with these scans is obviously to make money, but also is because they want to say, well, what if it's 6 months later? The patient can't remember that. Let me use a scan. Can't use it that way. That is the goal. But really, you know, when it lights up, the patient can typically remember what problems they had. There are some other ones that we used beforehand. This is the cool fiber tracking. Really cool. I have a picture of it on my wall, but no utility whatsoever now. PET scans, which similar to SPECT scans, measure flow of blood or how well certain glucose is being used, or, as we're going to transition now, look at how some breakdown products that are in the brain, all right, amyloid or tau, which are breakdown products, which show damage, can allow us to maybe track that. All right, very sexy, lot of potential. Snake oil right now. All right, UCLA 3 weeks ago got an injunction to stop claiming that they could predict who is going to get dementia from whether it's concussions or otherwise. They were using this technology. They had a football player, Tony Dorsett from the Cowboys, who they scanned and said, Tony, you have all this problem on your PET scan. You're going to get dementia. They were making it up. He had the findings, but I might have those findings right now. All right, it's dynamic. And I may or may not develop dementia. All right, so no utility. But again, research. All right, another area, biomarkers. You draw blood, you get saliva. If it were more severe injury, you get cerebral spinal. All right, and you look at it some way and try to recreate that graph, the David Hovde graph, and find out, did this person have an injury, both right away as well as 6 months later. All right, probably $100 million has been spent researching this. Right now, if, God forbid, I fell down on the way out and slipped and hit my skull, and a little piece of my brain came out, I would autograph it, but a little piece of my brain came out, all right? There is not a biomarker that they have that could tell me I had a brain injury. That's the technology right now. And that's honest. That's not, that's not even over the top. All right? It is over the top, but we don't have we're not good enough yet to diagnose that. And because they couldn't find anything in the last 10 years, they couldn't find anything in severe injuries. So they said, you know what? We've been looking at the wrong disease. Let's look at the more mild injuries, because that'll be much easier to figure out, right? No. That's what they're doing because that's where the money is, but they haven't figured that out. Here's a list of the most commonly used one. I made it small because they're useless. We're studying them all, and yes, there's promising stuff, and you know, and it's exciting, but no, nothing. And again, we can't diagnose it when it just occurs. How are we going to do it 6 months or a year later, or 10 years later, which is the type of people we're seeing now in our clinics? People who were missed or didn't report it, or even people from Vietnam. That's a long way. All right, so finishing. Do TBIs predispose for late life degeneration? That's one of the myths. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. All right? Specifically, moderate to severe ones. So if you have a severe brain injury, let's say I have a period of coma for 24 hours, which is the definition of that. You're unconscious 24 hours. You have a slightly increased risk in certain subpopulations, particularly those that have a genetic predisposition. It's not very high. I don't care about, I don't emphasize it to the patients. I say, you know, you have a high risk for everything. You know, it's slightly increased. There's nothing different you can do about it other than the wellness thing I was talking about before, so who cares? But that's not the question we're asking today, is do concussions lead to it? All right? And the term for concussion-related dementia is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. And I said earlier in my talk that there were about 90 cases in the history of man and women that have been reported. All right, 90. And there's been 50 million, give or take, of concussion in the last 20 years. So, I mean, it's my bread and butter, so it's a big deal, but it's not really that big of a deal, all right? And so, yes, you can have a higher risk. In concussions, there's a subgroup of people that get concussions for a living. I think you're into mixed martial arts, is that right? You are in a subgroup, if you do it enough, that's at risk for dementia. Love you, but just telling you that, all right? So it's time to stop. No. You know, it was funny, about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you know, there's a magazine, a journal that comes out every month or so in the VA. I think it was in the military one. I forget what it's called. Someone may know what it's called. But they had featured on it this buff kind of guy who was like the best mixed martial art guy, you know, in the military. And on the same cover, it was like talking about dementia and concussions. I'm like, really? Did you think about this and stuff? And they later apologized for it, right? But people that get thousands of concussions in their lifetime will definitely have a significantly higher risk of dementia. You don't need to give me $62 million to study that, all right? It's common sense. Your brain can't be injured thousands of times. All right? Now, it's not 100% risk. That's what we're trying to figure out. What is the percentage? There haven't been that many NFL players that have seen it, that have gotten it, but we're seeing increasingly more. And has anybody here ever met a retired older boxer, like who's had a long career? They got a really high risk of dementia. And it's not just because they get thousands. Sorry? Well, yes. Well, although Muhammad Ali has got Parkinson's related to it, but certainly he could be classified as that. And Parkinson's disease is increased with enough of these. But importantly, boxers usually get more than just concussions. If you ever watch boxing, they're out for a long time. Their thinking skills altered for days. So they're having moderate traumatic brain injuries. And that's why we see so many deaths in boxing, because they're actually bleeding and it's not always diagnosed. Now it's much higher. MMA, same thing. Nothing, you know, love you, babe. But you know, there's a high risk for that, all right? So, yeah, we don't know what the threshold is. We don't know how many years you got to play. We're trying to figure all that out. But the risk is there. And that's the research we're studying. So again, it's 3,000 to 8,000. And if you read the book, League of Denial, describes it very nicely. All right, and the League of Denial is full of the researchers that I'm doing research with. I've talked to them all. They're like, oh yeah, these guys are getting hammered. All right, I've had 6, and the highest I've seen in the war is 151. The average person who's had a concussion from the Iraq and Afghan wars has had 4. All right, 4. I don't think that's a high enough risk. But I don't know. We're studying it. We've got thousands of folks we're studying. There's fairly well thought out hypotheses as to what occurs. And in a very simple form, there's a couple slides I'm going to skip over because I want to make sure we finish, certainly on time, if not early, is when you get a concussion or any type of brain injury, just as if I bang my arm or get a broken bone, there's some cell death. There's some cell injury. And the body responds to that injury. It responds by cleaning it up. Sometimes it makes it worse if it overcleans it up, but usually it makes it better. All right, and it brings away that nasty schmutz and processes it, and the body then grows back, or it scars over and the rest of the organ takes over. Whether that's your liver, your brain, your kidney, whatever's your skin. All right. Well, one of the most common byproducts that occurs when there's an injury to the brain, 2 of them are beta amyloid. It's a protein that we make, particularly in response to injury or inflammation. And the other one, which is big in this area, is tau protein. All right, it's just something in our body. All right, if you get a brain injury, you're going to have an increased tau acutely. All right, we haven't found the exact amount. We don't have a blood test that can find that. Probably if we drilled into their head and pulled out some fluid, we'd see some. Or and cut a little piece of brain out, but they would be upset. All right, so we don't know that exact amount, but that's just what happens. Just like if you drink too much, your liver the next day is working really hard, and there's some junk in that liver. Your liver's really good at recovering, but if you do it enough, you get cirrhosis. All right, your lungs, if you smoke, God forbid. All right, the next minute, your lung is full of cells that are trying to clean up that carbon and the other junk in there. All right, and if you stop smoking, eventually most of that carbon goes away. All right, same thing with the liver, if you do it early enough. Well, in the brain, tau is that problem, but it turns over. It's dynamic, so we don't know how much is too much. We don't know where in the brain is the bad place. We don't know, as I said, how many injuries that occur. But that's the thought. If you get enough of an injury, either one massive injury or multiple little ones, your body can't keep up with cleaning the junk out. And when you get too much junk, all right, in your trunk, too much junk, you end up getting problems with your brain. You get dementias, or you get Parkinson's disease, secondary Parkinson's disease, as seen with Muhammad Ali. All right, but we don't know enough about when, why. Why do some people get 5,000 injuries and don't ever have a problem? We may not be testing them well, but why not? Whereas others do. Do they have a genetic profile? All right, most people don't have a genetic profile that we've found. There is one, and those people have a higher risk, but it's a small percentage. So we're studying this. It's increasingly being clarified. Tau-related dementia, or CTE, from multiple concussions, used to be called dementia pugilistica, or dementia or thinking problems related to fighting. All right, it was boxing originally. Boxers were demented like crazy. All right, and this was written in the 20s. It's like, we knew in the 20s this couldn't be good for you. Probably knew before that, right? All right, but now these people look different than those that get stroke-related dementias, that get alcohol-related encephalopathy dementias, that get the idiopathic or unknown reason dementias that we call Alzheimer's disease, and there's different forms of that. They don't look, these things, and there's frontal temporal dementias, we come up with different names because these things look differently. All right, in CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, they look different than your stroke dementia or your Alzheimer's dementia. They tend to have more behavioral dysfunction. They tend to have psychological issues. They have some a lot of anger, irritability, less of the memory stuff at first, but that does happen over time. But it's a small number of people we've seen this in. So it's probably too early to characterize it that well. But it's probably a unique type. It certainly is going to occur in people that get either a lot of concussions that don't heal in between, or that have some predisposing factor. But what I certainly can tell you is if you've had a high risk number of concussions and you used alcohol after that, and you didn't take care of your heart by eating a heart-healthy diet, and you didn't exercise, and you didn't sleep well, you're going to have a much higher risk of getting dementia. So I can't stop the 5,000 other than tell you to stop playing football, you know, or don't go to war, which it's not up to me to say that, all right? But I can tell you, you know what? Your brain has been pretty trashed, and you better start taking care of yourself. Now, the highest risk position in the NFL or NCAA for dementia is what? What would you guess for getting dementia from NFL? Quarterback, running back, lineman. These massive guys who every play, it's like, you know, it's like those sea elephants. Boom! It's like the bighorn sheep every play. All right, and they're getting a lot of velocity. I mean, I can't run as fast, and these guys are 3 bills. All right, they're nailing each other. And you know what? They also don't eat so good. I don't know if you've seen them without clothes on. I haven't seen many. But, you know, and afterwards, most of them don't thin down that well. Howie Long's an exception. He was never big. But most of them start big. They've got problems with blood pressure, cholesterol, exercise after they have their injuries. All right? And get this, some people who are in the NFL or other sports, they have some anger issues before they started playing. Certainly they're taught that after. It's true of the military as well. Not criticizing, but that's a condition that's going to increase your risk for injury as well. And when you're angry, you tend to drive a little faster, you tend to get into fights, so they have a lot of injuries afterwards. The hardest thing I had in my hyperbaric oxygen treatment studies is preventing the guys from fighting in the study. Because they were on military base, I had to have like den mothers watching these guys. Because they wanted to go drinking, which we said, you can't be drinking during the study, dude. You know, give me some love here, you know? And you know, you can't fight during the 8 weeks. You're there, you can't beat each other up, all right? And people do this on military bases. I've slept on military bases. I've never actually gone to the bars and stuff like that, but apparently it's a violent, in a healthy, generous, manly kind of way, kind of setting, all right? So, you know, people who get concussions need to take care of themselves. It'd be good to prevent the concussion, and we're trying to come up with rules. And you know, if we had a helmet that was like really big and fluffy, you know, like it was inflated and they kind of bounced off each other, like the sumo thing, the sumo wrestler kind of game people play, they do better, you know, because there'd be less acceleration, you know, not a choice just yet, all right, you know. So we got to figure out how to get their brains and bodies in good shape at the time of the injury, which their athletes are trying to do, but then the risk period for the CTE is 5 to 20 years after you get enough, after you've reached threshold. So during that period of time, maybe if we can intervene and get them healthier, all right, then we'd have a lower risk of dementia as well. So that's kind of my take on this. Either got to prevent these things, you got to prepare their brains before they go into battle or football or car accident to be healthy, and that means keep their bodies healthy, but also help them work on their mind if they're having stress issues or medical issues. When it occurs, we want to rapidly intervene with them in a holistic, integrative way, but give them education. The small percentage that continue to have problems, give them more intensive services. But then after that, let's say they're healed or not healed, they need to get back into wellness. All right? And if you don't do that, you're not really doing anything to help these people. Getting x-rays every couple years or like sending them to get them cognitive rehab again, all right, is not going to have an effect. Cognitively based services work for up to 18 months after a concussion. It does matter, but we don't know the difference between a psychologist doing it, an occupational therapist, and a speech and language pathologist, but certainly works. It also works for dementias. Here's kind of a summary statement that I kind of made, but in terms of, there are increased risks. You got to have a lot of them, unless it's a severe one. And I've emphasized it a couple of times, but we need that period of recovery in between. Because if you cut your arm repeatedly, like if you're a cutter, all right, that's a weird thing, but if you cut your arm for whatever reason repeatedly, and you don't let it heal in between each cut, man, you got nasty scars. If you cut your arm and let it heal, and then accidentally cut your arm 6 months later, you don't usually have as big of a scar, assuming the same size injury each time. But if you keep cutting open the scar, it doesn't do well. That's what we're talking about. And probably 4 weeks is the minimum period of time. Never going to happen. This is a wonderful country we live in. We like to fight and play rough sports. So we need to kind of figure out something in between that. This is kind of a PET scanning as well as some MRIs that are indicating there may be some of this tau deposition, all right, in individuals who are at higher risk, not well refined. So I'm going to finish with the studies we're doing. Obama came out in 2000, I guess it was 11, with the National Research Action Plan for Behavioral Sciences and TBI. In it, he said, let's throw a lot of money at CFU and let's better understand this. Let's throw a lot of money in San Antonio and understand PTSD. So all of these organizations have gotten together under VCU and the Richmond VA and have developed a comprehensive plan of research. Dr. Henry Liu at the University of Hawaii is the co-chair of our scientific advisory board and brings to bear his knowledge and his skills into our consortium. You've got a VA here and as well as Tripler base that Dr. Liu has some involvement in, but importantly, he's also part of the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Consortium, which has been a 20-year partnership between the VA and the DoD to figure this out as well, and he's one of their senior consultants, so you guys are part of this, gladly. Here's a short list. There's no room to fit it. I knew I would talk about Henry, so I didn't want to squeeze somebody else out. We've got about twice as many folks as this. They're all over the U.S. Here's our wonderful board. We've got currently 11 studies up and running. Doesn't matter what the studies are really, but we have the large study is tracking thousands of individuals who've had multiple concussions from the conflicts and tracking them for as long as they will allow us. Every year is testing every test you could ever come up with. Biomarkers and imaging and balance and eye testing, EEGs and their weight and their height and what their color preferences are. No, we don't do that one. And cognitive issues. And then following them every year for their life to see who's going to develop problems, to see who has problems, to see who responds to specific interventions, some of which are scientific, some of which they're going to get anyway. And then trying to figure this thing out in a very concerted way. All right, and that's the this is like the Framingham study, which is a big study of disease, and particularly cardiac disease that occurred in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it's still going on. That's what we're doing in our large longitudinal study, but we also have specialized studies as well that are trying to tease this apart. The brain's complex, thank you for coming. I didn't want to point that out, but our addiction specialist here at UH. The brain's complex, so we're studying at length. We've given out a lot of money to come up with pilot studies, which we're doing as well. We're linked with other NIH studies, so we're going to figure this thing out. It's going to take me more than 5 years and $62 million to do it, but we're going to figure this thing out, and that's part of the program that you're involved with, and that's what we're focusing on. It's important that we have large groups of folks we're going to study. It's important that we understand their risk factors before the injury, at the time of the injury, and afterwards. It's important that we intervene in these ways. There is no medicine that's going to cure this, I don't think ever. We're studying some, and the pharma industry believes there will be. There is no magical intervention with hyperbaric oxygen or transcranial magnetic stimulation or some other kind of electrical stimulation or warm water baths or high colonics. There's nothing that we've found or going to find. Really, it's a matter of prevention, early treatment, reduction of risk factors, and then getting folks back to health. Some of the myths that we started with to finish off with: there is scientific evidence that single concussions can cause long-term problems. No. Let your kids play sports. If your kid ain't so good, let them play tennis, all right? Or swim, all right? If your kid's good, let him play. If he gets more than one concussion each season, which is still a lot, don't let him play anymore. He's not very good, all right? All right, now most kids who are really good will get them, but just don't tell their parents, and they go on to greatness in the NFL, and then they become demented. But if your kid is 6'5" and 300 pounds, he's going to be at really high risk to develop problems, all right, if he plays professional sports. If that's his only skill, power to him, all right? If he's got other skills, develop those, because just being cognitively enhanced, going to school, actually studying, every day doing something cognitively stimulating, having normal and healthy socialization, not video games, not checking your email, not doing something in darkness, but with other people, all right? Just socializing. Limited alcohol, please, but just doing that will decrease the risk. But yes, there's an increased risk. But so my daughters played soccer. They got a couple concussions. I didn't care. Need people like me or Dr. Lou or other folks here to diagnose them. Nah, imaging is interesting, it's expensive, it's cool looking, but it's not there yet. We're studying it. There are emerging biomarkers. We just draw blood or check spit, or I don't know, you pee into a cup and I can tell you had a concussion 6 years ago and you look good. We're not even close. Not even close. Remember, if I fell out the door and was bleeding, head coming out, you still couldn't tell. All right, it would take one of you very sophisticated clinicians to realize that I had a brain injury. There's no evidence that anything works for concussion. We're just at the will of the world. It's in God's hands. It's in nature's hands. Lots of evidence that things work for headaches, for dizziness. Is it the strongest evidence? No. Is it level 1 or level A evidence? No. All right, but there's plenty of, and we've talked about some of the basic things, but you'll see in the clinical practice guideline, which is coming out shortly, but which is already online from a couple of years ago, we have specific paradigms for how to treat these people. All right, and a specialist can do it, but a primary care doctor can do it as well. And most concussions from the war are blast-related and have poor outcomes. Less than 50% of blast-related appear to have the same outcomes as everybody else. That's all I got. I'm going to stop a second. Thank you for almost all of you staying and most of you staying awake. Appreciate that. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you. Anybody? Yeah.
So you mentioned the transcranial.
Yeah, I shouldn't. What it is it's a technology that's been FDA approved for depression, but is being experimentally looked at for brain injury and other things. It's taking a magnet and putting it, a focused magnet, and putting it over a part of the body, in this case the head, or on the outside, and stimulating very briefly a part of the brain to get reaction from it. All right, it can move a limb, it can cause some sensory issues. It almost never causes seizures, which is a risk of it. With the idea being you're providing either increased stimulation in the part you want to stimulate to get activation of the brain, or you're going to the inhibitory site on the other side to decrease it if there's too much tone in a muscle. All right, hasn't been used in concussions in a big way yet. It's unclear if it works.
What is it best? What is it benefit?
Depression. That's all we got so far. Some people believe it helps with chronic pain of complex regional pain syndrome type. Some people believe it helps with spasticity from spinal cord injury or stroke. But again, most mental health disorders, there's a belief that somehow shock in the head, all right, in a very focused way. All right, it's clearly electroshock therapy has been well shown to be useful for certain types of depression as well. So rebooting the brain is helpful as well. I'm going to get you, sir, and then this one up there. Yes, sir.
I got two questions. One,
Uh-oh, it's always dangerous.
came to me.
Yes.
As a young kid, I was involved in a rock fight, and rock hit my head. Second incident, I was riding my bike home from high school, and I hit my head, and I saw the light.
Okay. Were you unconscious for long from the rock one?
No, it was this
So they're both concussion-like.
concussion.
Okay. Have you had any long-term problems from them?
Well, the only other problem is
This is a HIPAA thing. If you don't want to tell me, it's cool. I'm just, I became a doctor for a second.
the last couple of years I've been diagnosed with a
Okay.
I'm trying to find it.
Were they related to each other?
Related.
Yeah. Unless you had a long period of unconsciousness, meaning 6 hours or longer after either of those, then in my understanding, no, zero association.
Okay.
All right. So
Second question.
that wasn't two. Oh.
Say if I had a friend that was involved in a real bad car wreck. She had heart problems, kidney problems, some medical problems.
Polytrauma. Yeah.
Body trauma. But when she hit her head, would it say that affect her overall body function?
Can, yes. Your brain controls everything. And so if the brain injury is enough, then you can have problems with your hormones, your heart. You can have problems with the flow of cerebral spinal fluid throughout your body, so it can. And seeing a brain injury specialist, a rehab physician, a neurologist, a neurosurgeon.
Unfortunately, she died.
Oh, well, but that would be just general. But yeah, we're trying to keep it general, but I'm sorry to hear that. I think there was another question. Thank you.
You mentioned there's 5 centers, Richmond being one of them. When you get a referral from one of the other regional hospitals, what's the average length of stay for the treatment you offer? Are family care members
Yeah.
incorporated into that?
Yeah.
And
So,
thirdly, you had a triangle
Yeah.
chronic pain.
Yeah.
And does your program address the chronic addiction
Okay.
on the pain med?
Okay, quick answers, because people are, and I'm happy to, I'm going to stay, I'm sure afterwards and talk to anybody who likes, but quick answer is length of stay is dependent on the type of injury. You know, if folks are in a coma, 120 days is sort of the typical, you know, and we have about 85% wake up from that coma after these conflicts. But if it's a mild injury, it can be 2 weeks of outpatient, it can be 6 weeks of residential program, it can vary. The 5 centers, Richmond, San Antonio, Tampa, Minneapolis, and Palo Alto. So Palo Alto will be your closest. There was that one. Family is day 1, day 0 involved. There's an entire field of research as well as a family care manual that's available. The VA has set up programs to pay families to provide caretaking if needed. And there's also respite programs that are set up for families that it's challenging for. It can be very hard to do this. But clearly families need to be integrated right away. We don't know all the answers. We know a lot of questions. Family doesn't know all the answers to questions, but they're going to be with the patient for a long time, so we need to kind of partner on that. So very integrated. But the family care map was developed by DivBic, and it's something that you can get online. dvbic.org, great resource for clinical practice guidelines, for family care manual, for just about anything. dvbic.org. So thank you. Maybe one, I don't know, yeah, go ahead.
Just really quick, just to
Uh-oh.
and reinforce my understanding. So helmets, even the airplane helmets, do not protect you from concussion.
Right, and yeah. Right, but because again, the injury is not contact. The injury is acceleration, deacceleration. And the only thing that would work is if the helmet were actually attached to the brain, as opposed to the skull, like a woodpecker. Woodpecker skulls are attached to their brain, so when its skull moves, its brain's moving. And its brain is special, and it's got a special hollow skull and stuff, so that you're not getting movement of the brain. It's going every time, back and forth as one. All right, so we need to be woodpeckers. Or if you're in elephants that have their tusks cut off, there's some case reports of a higher risk of dementia, because an elephant's head is so big that when it starts moving, elephanting, whatever the hell, trumpeting, all right, it actually has such velocity that it can actually cause the brain to get concussions if you don't have the trunks to slow it down out there, all right? So if you had a helmet, and there's a guy in our shop, and I like him, I think he's making this up, who says, let's put magnets inside these helmets that are opposite each other, and then when the helmet's getting close, it's going to slow it down and ease it, like a slow airbag it, all right? It's absurd. But, you know, you're 300 pounds. I mean, what kind of magnet is that? You know, like, if anything, they should stick to each other. It would be better. They wouldn't move. But so helmets prevent the impact, prevent fractures, are invaluable. They're great. They work. The Rydell's are great. They're not as good as they say because they don't prevent these at all. All a helmet does is add more weight. And weight equals more momentum, more velocity, or actually more momentum. When you add that to velocity, you're ending up with a higher risk. But, you know, and that's why actually that they used to have the face things went out further, but now they're in closer because they look kind of cool, and because they're not in the way. But that actually would have been better to be out there to slow it down a little bit. In the NHL, there are no requirements for helmets. They don't have to wear them. And when I went to locker rooms, they're wearing these flimsy little things with a little glass, like paper, all right? And I'm like, guys, why do you wear this? Because they said, because we look good, and our hair looks good. And I said, really? They said, yeah. Look, that's not good. They said, look, we know it does nothing. You know, we're getting slammed at 30 miles an hour into like wood. This isn't going to do anything to us, so we might as well look good, all right? I swear that's what they said, all right? Now, goalies have much stronger helmets because they have 120 mile an hour puck hitting them. All right, and they're at risk for getting skull fractures, facial fractures, but their heads get whipped back too. If I do that enough, I'm going to get one. Maybe one last question, and then we'll close up.
So when I was a little boy, there was a branch that fell off a tree and hit my head, and I woke up just fine from it. And then I also was in a motorcycle accident with a helmet on. And also when I was young, I grabbed an electrical wire. And I went about 20 feet up in the air and then came down to the grass.
Wow, cool.
So, that was pretty sad, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I did see like a flash of orange or red for about 1 year, twice. It was pretty odd. And I never knew what that was until you mentioned seeing orange. Did she say it was like a flash or?
Did I say that or did he say that?
Did you say
Yeah, like you see, yeah, of orange. I've never seen the orange, but yeah. Yes, so you've had probably 3 concussions as well as an electrical injury to the brain. Right? And your question is, are you going to get dementia? Not on my watch. Is that his question?
Okay.
Yeah, but I will say, before I say that, is electrical injury to the brain and neurologic system is different than concussion and may actually, in a subset of people, have progression over years, 15 to 20 years. His was a while ago. It's probably not causing you problems now. You're probably out of the woods, but it's a different phenomenon. Oh, then you're still in the woods. No, you have a but have you had any problems yet? You should see problems now.
Nothing yet.
All right, I think you're okay, but eat right, exercise, be cognitively stimulated, be social, mindful. One final question, then we'll end. You sure? Nice shirt, by the way. Love the shirt. All right. So again, thank you for the invite, thanks for the attention, and thanks for the great questions.
Thank you very
You're
much.
very welcome.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Before we leave, I'd like to recognize 2 people who were instrumental in bringing Dr. Seafood here. First is Dr. Liu. Could you stand up? Dr. Liu is the chair of the Department of Communication Sciences Disorder. Also, Dr. Violet Horvath, who is the director of Pacific Basin Rehab Research and Training Center. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.